The Camden house had sat at the very end of Hemlock Avenue for more than 100 years. Back in the day, its grand Victorian style used to be the pride and joy of Fairhaven, a quiet little town tucked away in western Pennsylvania. But by the time 2014 rolled around, the old place was falling apart. The last person to own it had walked away after a foreclosure back in the late 1990s, and no one had bothered with it since. Locals saw it more as a ghost story than a house. Teenagers would dare each other to spend the night inside, and folks living nearby often griped about strange lights flickering or eerie sounds drifting out after dark. For officers Rachel Monroe and Travis Holt from the Fairhaven Police Department, getting calls about 891 Hemlock Avenue, the Camden house, had become part of the usual routine. 9 times out of 10, they'd show up to find some kids had broken in, left behind emptied beer cans or sprayed graffiti on the walls. Every now and then, they'd run into a homeless person just trying to get out of the cold. They'd take notes, seal up any busted windows or doors as best they could, and file yet another report urging the city to finally tear the place down before someone got hurt. So, when dispatch got a call on the night of November 17, 2014, it didn't raise many eyebrows. Just sounded like more of the same. "There's someone screaming in that old Camden place," said Mrs. Margaret Bell, a retiree who lived right across the street. "Not like some kids goofing off, real screaming. Somebody's in trouble." Monroe and Holt were sent to check it out, already figuring it would be another false alarm. That house had racked up so many calls over the years that officers barely blinked anymore. "Probably just some teens streaming a horror flick on their phones," Holt muttered as they pulled up to the curb around 10:37 p.m. "Or maybe those amateur ghost hunters are back at it again." The house stood there like a black skeleton in the dark. Parts of the roof had caved in, and the upper outline looked jagged against the night sky. Dead vines clung to the siding like bony hands, and nearly every window was either shattered or covered with old, warped plywood. The front lawn was nothing but wild weeds and neglect. Standard protocol said they had to approach quietly, no lights, no sirens. Last thing they wanted was to scare off whoever might be inside. As they stepped carefully up the cracked concrete path, Officer Monroe spotted something odd. Fresh tire tracks sunk into the mud along the side yard, pointing toward the back. She aimed her flashlight at the grooves. "Somebody's been here not long ago," she said. "Heavy vehicle too. I'd guess an SUV or maybe a truck." The front door, which they'd secured with a hefty padlock just 3 weeks earlier, was now hanging ajar. No sign of the lock anywhere. Holt radioed in their location and noted the signs of forced entry before the two moved inside, drawing their weapons just in case. Even in its ruined state, you could still see flashes of what the Camden house used to be. The foyer had a once grand staircase, though the railings were busted in spots. Bits of ornate molding still clung to the high ceilings, cracked and warped from years of water damage. Their flashlights cut through the heavy dark, catching dust floating in the air and showing the scattered remains left behind by squatters and vandals. "Fairhaven Police Department, anybody in here?" Holt called out, his voice bouncing off the bare walls. Nobody answered. But both officers noticed something that gave them pause. It was too quiet. Not even the usual skittering of rats you'd expect in a place like this. The house didn't even creak. No wind rattling the frame, no shifting boards, just a heavy, unnatural silence. Monroe and Holt swept the first floor slowly, checking each room like they had so many times before. Nothing stood out at first, just the usual graffiti, junk left behind, and the overwhelming stink of rot and mold. But when they reached the kitchen at the back, that's where things started to feel off. The door leading to the backyard had been reinforced with new hinges and a serious lock. Heavy-duty stuff, way too fresh for a place falling to pieces. It looked completely out of place against the warped wood and peeling paint. Then they spotted something even worse. There was a streak of something dark smeared on the door frame. "This just happened," Monroe said, crouching down and gently touching it with a gloved hand. "Still sticky." Before they could examine it any closer, a low, rhythmic thudding caught their attention. It was faint but definitely there, and it was coming from beneath their feet. They looked at each other, both thinking the same thing. Most houses in this area did not have basements. But the Camden house did. Tucked away in a tight hallway off the kitchen, they found the basement door. It had been upgraded too. This one was made of steel and locked with a commercial-grade mechanism. But this time, someone had left it open. Not forced. Not pride. The key was still sticking out from the lock. Whoever it was, they left in a rush. Holt muttered, carefully turning the knob and swinging the door open. What hit them next was the smell, thick and putrid, a mix of blood, bodily fluids, and the harsh bite of chemical cleaners. It rolled up from the darkness below like a wave. "Dispatch, this is Officer Holt," he said into his radio, his voice steady but tight. "We need immediate backup at 891 Hemlock Avenue. Possible active crime scene. Could be victims inside." They moved down the narrow wooden steps, weapons up, flashlights cutting across the pitch-black basement. Each board creaked under their boots, echoing through the silence. What they found down there made both officers freeze. The basement had been completely gutted and rebuilt into something that looked like a back-alley surgical lab. Thin plastic sheets hung from ceiling pipes, dividing the room into sections. LED lights, battery-powered, were rigged along the stone walls, off now, but still warm to the touch. A generator sat in the corner, quiet, but not long shut off judging by the fuel level. And at the center of it all was a steel table. Heavy, like the kind found in morgues. Built-in restraints. Drainage grooves. The whole setup. Beside it was a tray filled with surgical tools. Some had dried blood on them, even though someone had clearly tried scrubbing them down. "Jesus Christ," Monroe whispered, her light drifting to the floor. There were dark stains smeared across the concrete, too many to count. That thumping noise returned, louder now. It was coming from a door at the far end. The original coal room. This one was locked too, but with nothing fancy, just an old padlock. "Fairhaven Police Department," Holt called out. "Is someone in there?" A muffled cry answered back. You could barely make out the words, but it was definitely human. Without hesitation, Holt smashed the lock with the butt of his flashlight and yanked the door open. Inside was a nightmare. 3 people, 2 women and 1 man, were crammed into the small, windowless room. Their hands were bound with zip ties, mouths gagged. They looked pale, weak. All 3 had fresh surgical bandages across their abdomens, bruises covering their arms and legs, and strips of medical tape holding wounds closed. One of the women was unconscious, her breathing shallow. The others stared up at the officers with wide, desperate eyes, relief and fear mixing on their faces. "Dispatch, this is Officer Monroe," she said quickly. "We need medical crews immediately. Multiple victims. Trauma from surgical procedures. Get Detective Nolan Price out here too." As backup rolled in and paramedics began working on the victims, the pieces of a horrifying story started to come together. Between gasps and shallow breaths, the 2 conscious survivors told what little they knew. They'd been taken from all over, one from a homeless camp, another from a bus station, another from a truck stop somewhere out of state. They had all been drugged, brought here, and subjected to surgeries while still alive. The man, who later gave his name as Jordan Blake, had been held the longest, nearly 2 weeks. He remembered the most. "They were taking stuff," Jordan said to Detective Nolan Price during his hospital interview. "Organs mostly. Kidneys. The guy doing it, he wore designer clothes when he got here, but before the cutting, he changed into scrubs. Then after surgery they'd dump us in that little room to heal, or not. If you made it, they'd drive you miles out and just leave you." He didn't need to explain what happened if you didn't survive. The case that followed broke open something bigger than anyone had expected. Investigators found that the Camden house had been used for at least 8 months as an illegal organ harvesting operation. The town's remote location, stretched thin police force, and the house's reputation as just another rundown haunt made it the perfect hideout. Forensic teams matched evidence in the basement to at least a dozen other victims. 3 of them didn't make it. Tucked away inside that basement surgical setup was something you would not expect: top-tier medical equipment, the kind you would only find in real hospitals. Investigators later confirmed that it had been stolen from medical facilities across 3 different states. The generator, which powered the lights and gear, had been specially modified to run almost silently, which explained why nobody in the neighborhood had ever reported hearing anything unusual. The big break in figuring out who was behind it all came from the most unlikely place. As rundown as the Camden house had become, the old security system from its last legal owner was still partly intact. Most of the visible cameras had been taken offline by the criminals, but what they didn't know was that a paranoid previous owner had installed a backup recording unit hidden way up in the attic crawlspace, meant to catch burglars back when the house still had some value. That old system had been quietly recording the whole time. When investigators pulled the footage, they finally got what they needed: faces, voices, movements. It led them to 4 people deeply involved in the operation. 2 of them were former paramedics who handled snatching the victims and patching them up afterward. There was also a surgical tech who prepped the instruments. But the biggest shock was the man doing the cutting. Once a respected transplant surgeon, he had lost his license 5 years earlier after a malpractice scandal. Turns out, these folks were selling organs on the black market. Their clients were wealthy, desperate people, some who had been turned away from the proper transplant system due to their age or medical history, others who just didn't want to wait. The Camden house was just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. This crew had been running similar operations at several other remote properties throughout the northeastern United States. The house on Hemlock Avenue just happened to be the only one in a residential area. For Officers Monroe and Holt, this was the biggest case they'd ever worked. It started out looking like nothing, a routine check on a rundown property that had been a thorn in the town's side for years. But underneath that cracked facade, a full-blown criminal network had been hiding in plain sight, preying on the people most of society had forgotten. Later, during the trial, Monroe said something that stuck with a lot of folks. "What gets to me the most is how they used the house's reputation against us. They knew we'd been out there a dozen times or more. They counted on us brushing off each new call as just another false alarm. Just another ghost story about the creepy house on the corner." In 2016, after the trial ended and the evidence had been fully processed, the Camden house was finally torn down. In its place now stands a small memorial park, quiet, with a few benches and flower beds, but powerful in what it represents. A plaque there lists the names of the known victims, including the 3 rescued that night, and others identified through forensic evidence. And beneath those names is a simple line that now serves as an unofficial motto for the Fairhaven Police Department: "Even the 100th call might be the one that matters most." The case forced some serious changes within the department. They set up a dedicated unit to routinely check on abandoned buildings throughout town. These teams started using thermal cameras to look for heat sources, people, equipment, anything out of place. What happened at Camden changed the way they handled every vacant structure from then on. Police departments around the country took notice. The Camden House case became standard material in training programs, especially in cities dealing with large numbers of abandoned properties. It served as a grim reminder that sometimes, the real danger hides right behind the stories we laugh off. Detective Nolan Price put it best in his final report. The Camden house was not chosen despite the fact it was well known and had generated plenty of police calls. It was chosen because of that. The more false alarms it had, the less seriously we took each new one. The criminals turned our complacency into camouflage, and that cost people their lives. Today, the lot is peaceful. Trees have been planted. Flowers bloom where horror once lived. And that plaque stands as a warning, a memorial, and a promise: we will not ignore the next call. What brought me and Vasquez back out to the storage facility wasn't a call from dispatch. It was something she picked up on while going over recent theft reports. As we pulled up the access road, she pointed out the pattern. "This is the 4th break-in here in the past 2 months," she said. "But here's what's strange. None of the renters could name a single thing that was missing." I gave that a moment of thought. Maybe the crooks got spooked. ran off before they could actually steal anything. For separate times? She countered, not missing a beat. And always at this same facility? Easton Ridge has 6 other storage businesses, and not one of them has had a break-in during that same stretch. She had a point. Easton Ridge Storage Solutions sat on a big 5-acre lot, way out at the end of an industrial road. It was surrounded by a tall chain-link fence, barbed wire across the top. The layout was pretty standard, rows of single-story metal buildings with roll-up doors, 200 units in total. The place had cameras, but only at the main gate and office. None of the rows themselves were covered, a cost-saving decision that would come back to bite later. Gerald Atkins, the manager, was already out front waiting for us. You could see the stress on his face. "Back again?" he said, shaking his head. "These break-ins are killing my business. People are starting to get real nervous." He led us out to the back row of the property. Sure enough, the latest targets were all grouped together, 4 units in a row, every one of them with busted padlocks. You could see where bolt cutters had been used. "These all belong to long-term renters," Atkins explained. "Folks who barely come by anymore. Some haven't been here in over a year." I bent down to look at the remains of one of the locks. "You track when renters come in and out?" Atkins shook his head. "No, we're not that high-tech. Tenants use their gate code to get in any time, day or night. But once they're inside, we don't have a system to monitor who goes where." "And none of them said anything was missing?" Vasquez confirmed, writing notes in her little spiral notebook. "Nope," he said. "One guy couldn't even remember what he had in there. Thought it was old furniture from his parents' place. Another one lives out of state now." Then Atkins mentioned something that made me pause, something that hadn't made it into the initial report. "Well, look, it's not just the locks. It's what we found inside. These units weren't just broken into, they were used." Vasquez frowned. "Used? What does that mean?" Atkins looked uneasy. "Some of the renters noticed their stuff had been moved around. Like someone cleared a space in the middle of the unit. One guy found a folding chair that wasn't his, set up like someone had been sitting there." I exchanged a glance with Vasquez. "That didn't sound like your usual smash and grab." "We'd like to see those units," I said. The first one had your typical household stuff, furniture wrapped in plastic, boxes labeled kitchen, and bedroom, probably packed up during a move or maybe an estate sale. But sure enough, everything had been pushed to the sides, clearing out a neat space in the middle. Nothing else touched. The next unit was the same story. This one held outdoor gear, holiday decorations, some camping supplies. All of it shoved out of the way. And just like Atkins said, a folding chair was sitting dead center, facing the back wall like someone had been waiting for something, or someone. "Has crime scene gone over any of this?" I asked, careful not to disturb anything. Atkins shook his head. "Patrol didn't think it was necessary. Figured there was no crime if nothing was stolen." Vasquez crouched near the concrete floor, studying something closely. "There's something here," she said, pointing with her pen. "Small, dark stains. Drops scattered in a pattern. Could be paint, or oil, or who knows," Atkins offered, clearly wanting to believe it was nothing. "I want crime scene out here," I said. "And I want to see the security footage from the nights those locks were cut." Back in the office, Atkins brought up the camera system. It was basic. Only 4 cameras, watching the front gate, the office entrance, and both sides of the outer fence. The footage auto-deleted every 30 days. He pulled up the night of the latest break-in, just 3 nights ago. Most of it was uneventful. But at exactly 1:47 in the morning, a dark panel van rolled up to the gate and entered using a valid code. There were no license plates visible on the van. It drove straight to the back row, and then slipped out of sight, past where the cameras reached. "Whose code was used?" Vasquez asked, leaning in. Atkins pulled up the log. "Thomas Rourke. Unit B7R3. One of the broken-into units?" I asked. "Nope," Atkins said, his eyebrows lifting. "His unit's way on the other side of the property. One of the biggest ones we've got. He's been renting it for about 8 months now. We need to speak with Mr. Rourke, I said. Atkins sighed. Good luck with that. Guy pays 6 months at a time, always by money order. No phone number on file, no email. Real private. The number Thomas Rourke had listed on his rental agreement always went straight to voicemail. And the inbox was full, every time. That didn't stop the investigation from heating up fast, though. Once the crime scene team got back to us with confirmation on those stains Vasquez spotted in the unit. It was blood. Human blood. The spatter pattern told its own story. Medium velocity. Like what you'd see when someone gets hit with a blunt object. That was all the probable cause we needed. I put in for a warrant to search all 4 of those burglarized storage units from top to bottom. What we found changed everything. Each unit had been scrubbed down, but luminol lit them up like crime scene Christmas trees. Blood had seeped into the concrete, cleaned up just enough to fool the eye but not enough to fool science. In one of them, tucked beneath a shelf, the techs pulled out a strip of duct tape. There was hair stuck to the sticky side. Human. These aren't burglaries, I told my lieutenant during the next briefing. Someone's using these units for something else entirely. The real break came when we managed to get an address for Rourke through utility records. He had a small ranch-style house in a nearby town. Looked abandoned. The porch was buried in newspapers, the mailbox stuffed with unopened mail. A welfare check revealed he hadn't shown up for work in over 2 weeks. His employer, a local print shop, told us Rourke had called in sick, then never responded to any follow-ups. That was enough. We got a search warrant for his unit at the storage facility, Unit B7R4. What we found inside was like stepping into the control room of a nightmare. The space was spotless, nothing like the other cluttered units. It was laid out with precision. In one corner, a desk with a laptop sat next to a filing cabinet. Several clear plastic storage bins lined the wall, all neatly labeled with dates. And then there was the video gear, tripods, cameras, lighting rigs, set up like a small film studio. The laptop was locked up tight with a password, but the bins weren't. Inside were external hard drives, dozens of USB sticks labeled by hand, and ledgers full of financial records. The paper trail painted a picture of something that had been going on for nearly 3 years. Once our digital forensics team got into that laptop and started digging through the hard drives, the truth hit like a punch to the gut. Hundreds of videos, all documenting torture and abuse. Real people, real victims, filmed in those storage units we had just walked through. Rourke wasn't working alone. At least 2 others were helping him. They'd been breaking into other tenants' units, specifically ones belonging to folks who rarely, if ever, came around. They turned those spaces into makeshift recording studios, did whatever they were going to do, cleaned up, then hauled the gear and footage back to Rourke's own unit for storage. That way, if anything ever got found, the blame would land on the innocent renters first. It was diabolical. They had been targeting the most vulnerable people out there, homeless folks, drifters, folks from bus stations across 3 counties. People who wouldn't be missed right away. People who wouldn't have family out there raising hell if they vanished. They uploaded the videos to the dark web and made thousands of dollars a month off it. When I later testified in court, I summed it up like this. They used other people's units as kill rooms, so nothing could ever be traced back to them. They were counting on nobody connecting the dots. The most chilling part came when we started matching the dates on those videos with missing persons reports. At least 7 of the victims had never been found. Their cases had been chalked up as runaways or lost transients, until now. That facility, isolated, always open, with barely any surveillance, was the perfect cover. The suspects figured out that slight changes inside a unit would go unnoticed for months, especially when the renters themselves barely checked in. And if someone did notice something off, just looked like a failed break-in. Nothing missing. No big deal. Rourke was finally picked up at a bus terminal 2 states away, trying to disappear with a fake ID. His 2 partners were caught within weeks, identified from the footage we recovered. All 3 were eventually handed multiple life sentences for kidnapping, torture, murder, and a long list of other charges. For the Easton Ridge Police Department, the case shook everything up. What we thought were just run-of-the-mill break-ins turned out to be the tip of one of the most twisted criminal operations we've ever seen. That case, now known around the department and beyond as the storage facility case, is taught in police academies across the country. It's used as a cautionary tale on how low-level property crimes can hide something much darker underneath, and how patterns are everything. If we had written it off after that first report, God only knows how much longer it might have gone on. As for me and Vasquez, the case changed us. I ended up shifting my focus completely. I now lead a unit dedicated to crimes against the homeless and missing persons, people who slipped through the cracks. Vasquez got promoted to detective. She now teaches at the State Police Academy, showing new recruits how to dig deeper, look harder, and never treat any case as routine. What sticks with me, Vasquez said during an interview years later, is how those people exploited every blind spot we had. Not just the physical gaps in security at that storage facility, but the mental ones too, the way we assumed something wasn't serious just because it didn't look like a crime on the surface. She paused. Broken locks with nothing missing? We almost shrugged it off. Almost. Easton Ridge Storage Solutions didn't last long after the investigation broke wide open. The property was sold off, and eventually turned into a quiet office park. These days, the folks who work there, people answering phones, filing paperwork, going to lunch meetings, most of them have no idea what used to happen on that land. They walk right past the place, unaware of the horror that once hid behind those ordinary roll-up doors. But back at the Easton Ridge Police Department, the memory hasn't faded. A small plaque hangs in the hallway outside the Detective Bureau. It lists the names of the 7 victims we were able to identify, 7 lives lost in silence, until someone finally started asking the right questions. Beneath those names, there's a simple inscription. It's become a kind of mantra for every officer who walks those halls. Look beyond the obvious. The crime you see may not be the crime that was committed. March 2013. It was around that time of year when the Midwest skies hang heavy with clouds and the wind cuts through your coat, no matter how thick it is. Deputy Amanda Griggs had been pulling night shifts in Summit Valley County for 8 years by then. Her patrol route took her down long stretches of dark, empty roads, through quiet farm towns and faded gas stations. Most nights were calm, helping the occasional stranded driver, checking up on vacant properties, maybe a noise complaint or two. One of her routine stops was the Whisper Pines Motor Lodge, a rundown, one-story place just off the interstate. 20 rooms, a flickering neon sign that barely held on to the M and L, and a lot full of tired cars and long-haul trucks. Truckers and passers-by mostly. Never gave her a reason to worry. Until one rainy Tuesday morning at exactly 3:17 a.m. A guest staying in room 212, a commercial truck driver just passing through, called the front desk to report strange noises from the room next door. Said he heard muffled voices, something heavy being dragged or shifted on the floor. He didn't sound panicked, just uneasy. Griggs was on patrol with her partner, Jake Renner. They decided to check it out. The night manager, Stanley Brewster, met them at the front desk. He knew them by name. "Room 210? He said, not even needing to hear the full story. "That'd be Mr. Benson. Comes through every few weeks. Quiet guy. Pays in cash. Think he's in sales or something." According to Brewster, this Mr. Benson always booked the same room, declined housekeeping, and kept to himself. The window was sealed tight with an extra layer of dark cloth pinned behind the curtain. Outside, a sleek black SUV sat parked, a little too fancy for a budget motel like this. When Griggs knocked, a man in his 40s answered the door. Calm, clean-cut, and dressed like he had just stepped out of a conference room. He introduced himself as Craig Benson and claimed he had been watching a loud movie. Right away, something about him didn't sit right. His words were too smooth, his attitude too polished for someone who'd just been shaken awake in the middle of the night. When the deputies asked to step inside, he hesitated. Got defensive. Then Griggs heard something, a faint noise coming from the back of the room. Not a movie. Not background noise. A sound that didn't belong. When Benson suddenly tried to close the door on them, Renner blocked it with his foot. Things escalated fast. Benson made a break for the bathroom, tried climbing out through the small window, but they caught him out in the parking lot. Inside room 210, Griggs found a locked closet. When they got it open, what they found nearly stopped her heart. A young woman, dazed, frightened, but alive. She'd been reported missing from a nearby town just a few days earlier. She got immediate medical care and made a full recovery. But the story didn't end there. The room contained several devices, electronics, storage media, and strange paperwork. All signs pointed to a bigger story. Craig Benson turned out to be an alias. The man's real name was David Quinton Miles, a former IT consultant who had built a new life behind layers of false identities. He traveled often, staying in cheap motels under fake names, covering his trail with cash payments and bogus credentials. What investigators uncovered over the following weeks was unsettling. Dawes had been operating across multiple states, quietly moving from town to town, targeting vulnerable people in isolated areas. He used his tech skills to create encrypted walls around his files and activity, making it tough to trace where he'd been and what he'd done. The discovery in that motel room led to multiple charges: unlawful detainment, impersonation, and a list of digital crimes. There were no confirmed deaths, but the psychological trauma left behind was real. The women he had detained, some for hours, others for days, had suffered through fear, confusion, and manipulation. Thanks to Deputy Griggs's sharp instincts and unwillingness to write off a strange noise as nothing, the operation ended before things got worse. Her report would go on to be cited in law enforcement seminars as a textbook case on why even the smallest complaints, especially in places like motels or truck stops, should never be dismissed. Whisper Pines Motor Lodge didn't last long after that. The owners shut it down within a year, and the building was torn down soon after. But Room 210? That became something of a legend among officers. Proof that evil doesn't need a big city or a high body count. Sometimes, it hides behind silence and routine. Most nights, Officer Shane Walker's shift rolled by without much excitement. It was the kind of town where real crime was so rare, the officers half-joked they knew all the regular offenders by first name. Folks usually caught with a little too much to drink, or stealing something that barely cost $20. Glenmore was peaceful, sleepy even. The department's detective team had just 3 people, and they spent as much time helping out neighboring towns as they did working their own caseload. Walker had a simple ritual to get through the long overnight hours. Right around 2 o'clock, he'd switch his patrol car's radio to KQTN 104.7 FM, a local station that ran a quirky call-in show called Dean Confessions. Hosted by a woman named Callie Dean, the format was straightforward. People called in anonymously to share their secrets, stories, or regrets. Callie would listen, toss in a bit of commentary, maybe some advice, maybe just a laugh. Most of the time, it was light stuff. Relationship drama, gripes about bosses. And now and then, you'd get someone with a story so strange it had to be made up. Walker liked it though. Keeps me awake. He'd tell new patrol partners who looked at him funny for tuning in. And you'd be surprised what people admit to when they think nobody important's listening. But on December 14th, 2017, that show took a turn. One that pulled Walker straight into the most unsettling case Glenmore had ever seen. That night, a man called in, said his name was Ray. Right away, Walker noticed something different about his voice. It wasn't shaky or emotional like most callers. It was calm, flat, like he'd rehearsed what he was going to say. "I'm calling because I think someone should know what's happening," the man began. "There's a house in Glenmore, on Cypress Hollow Road, where people go in, but they don't come out." Callie Dean, always ready with her dramatic flair, leaned into the moment. "Sounds like the start of a horror movie, Ray. Care to elaborate?" But Ray didn't play along. "Number 412, he said. "Blue house with white trim. People get brought there at night. I've counted 8 visitors in the last month, always after midnight, always guided in. But I've never seen anyone leave. Callie tried to lighten the tone. Maybe they're leaving during the day when you're not watching? I've watched during the day too, Ray replied, steady as ever. The only one who ever leaves is the homeowner. Man in his 50s. Drives a dark green SUV. Leaves every morning at 7:15, comes back around 6 in the evening. He lives alone, supposedly. But those visitors? They never come out. The call went on for a few more minutes. Ray listed off specific observations, times, car descriptions, patterns. Callie, clearly unsure how to handle it, started steering things toward her usual theatrics. She joked about vampires, cults. But Walker didn't laugh. He knew that house. 412 Cypress Hollow Road was in his patrol zone. The owner was Dr. Vincent Harrow, a well-respected physician who had lived in Glenmore for nearly 2 decades. Walker had even spoken to him the year before, just a routine call after someone tagged his fence with spray paint. Still, something about the way Ray had described things didn't sit right. He wasn't fishing for attention like most of the show's callers. He wasn't dramatic. He was detailed. Careful. So around 3:15 that morning, Walker swung by the house. It was quiet. No movement. Lights off, except for one faint glow coming from what looked like the basement. Nothing that screamed trouble, but the house itself was tucked far back from the road, surrounded by thick old trees. It had a detached garage and a covered walkway, perfect for keeping things out of sight. Walker told himself it was probably nothing. But he made a note to keep an eye on the place. He might have forgotten all about it if not for what happened the next night. Same time. Same show. Ray called in again. "I'm calling about the Cypress Hollow house," he said, not wasting a second. "I saw something new tonight." He went on to explain that just an hour earlier, he'd watched the same man, Harrow, bring someone into the house. A young woman, blonde, stumbling like she was half asleep. She looked disoriented, he said. He was holding her arm, guiding her up the steps. She tripped. And then I heard her speak. Ray's voice stayed steady. She said, "Please? I won't tell anyone. Just let me go." Then they went inside. You could hear Callie tense up. Legal alarms probably going off in her head. She tried to cut him off, gently. Tried to redirect. But Ray pushed through. "I'm not making this up," he said. "I have pictures. I've recorded video. I've got proof people are being brought into that house. Something's happening there, and no one's doing a damn thing about it." And then, click! The call ended. Callie jumped in with a hasty disclaimer about how the station wasn't responsible for the opinions of callers, and then cut to a commercial break like nothing had happened. But Walker didn't forget it. Not this time. As soon as the second radio call ended, Officer Walker didn't wait. He got on the radio and requested a welfare check at 412 Cypress Hollow Road. Dispatch told him another patrol unit was already nearby and would handle it. He listened closely as the minutes ticked by. About 15 minutes later, the update came through. The responding officers had spoken with Dr. Vincent Harrow. They said the man had been understandably irritated at being woken up after midnight, but he was cooperative. They found no signs of a disturbance, no unusual activity, nothing that seemed out of place. The call was logged as unfounded. Probably a prank, they figured, someone trying to stir things up on late-night radio. Walker might have let it go, he wanted to. But the next morning, as his shift was ending and he walked out toward his car, something unexpected happened. A woman approached him in the parking lot. She looked different than she sounded on the air, more grounded, tired maybe. "Officer Walker?" she asked. "I hope it's okay I'm coming to you like this." She introduced herself as Callista Dean, the real person behind Callie Dean, the radio host. Gone was the theatrical voice she used on the show. What came out was real, and a little shaky. "My producer told me you called the station this morning," she said. "Asking about our caller, Ray. Walker nodded. Yeah. Just wanted to see if there was any background, anything to help figure out if he was real or just someone playing games. They told you we don't track caller info, right? They did. Callista glanced around, like she was making sure no one else was listening. That's true. Officially. But I wanted to tell you something, off the record. She lowered her voice. That guy, Ray, he's contacted me directly. Not through the station line. Through my personal email. Walker frowned, listening carefully. He sent me photos. She continued. Clips, too. Of that house on Cypress Hollow. I thought it was just a listener trying to get attention. Maybe angling for airtime. But last night, after his second call, he sent something else, something I think you need to see. She pulled a small USB drive from her coat pocket. I know I should have gone straight to the station, or the police. But the station's legal team told me not to get involved. Said if it's nothing, I could be liable. Still, I couldn't just ignore it. Walker took the drive. I'll look into it. He promised. Later that day, in a secure room at the station, he plugged the USB into a department-issued laptop. What he saw changed everything. The drive held a handful of video files, all recorded from a spot across the street from 412 Cypress Hollow. Each clip showed different people being escorted into the house at night. Always late. Always quiet. And always by the same man, Dr. Vincent Harrow. But the most recent footage was what locked everything into place. It showed a young blonde woman, clearly disoriented, being led to the house. The figure beside her was Harrow. The clip didn't have clean audio, but just before they entered, a faint voice could be heard. Please, let me go. I won't tell anyone. That was all Walker needed to hear. He went straight to Detective Leah Sandoval, one of the department's senior investigators. Sandoval reviewed the footage and didn't hesitate. We're going to dig into this, she said, but carefully. Dr. Harrow had been part of the Glenmore community for years. A trusted face. Digging into him would have to be done by the book. They started quietly. Surveillance teams were set up. Background checks were ordered. What came back told a much darker story than anyone expected. Harrow was, in fact, a licensed physician, at least he had been. But years earlier, in another state, he'd surrendered his license after accusations of inappropriate conduct with patients. Nothing criminal had stuck, but it was enough to push him out of practicing medicine. Not long after, he showed up in Glenmore, reinventing himself as a medical consultant and part-time researcher. He didn't run a practice. But he kept connections to medical facilities and research institutions, enough to stay in that professional circle. Building permits on file showed that right after he bought the Cypress Hollow house, he poured serious money into the basement. Extensive renovations. Soundproofing. Climate-controlled rooms. Enhanced electrical systems. It was all framed as a lab and archival space for private consulting work. Then came the biggest break. Sandoval was able to match the woman from the video to a missing person report. Nina Travers, 24 years old. A graduate student from a university just 2 towns over. She'd vanished 3 days earlier after attending a symposium where Dr. Harrow had been a guest speaker. That was probable cause. The warrant came through fast. When officers entered 412 Cypress Hollow, what they found shook even the most experienced among them. The basement had been transformed into a high-tech lab and detention facility. 3 separate rooms. All soundproofed. All sealed with electronic locks. Inside were signs of recent captivity. Clothing, bags, personal items, including things that belonged to Nina Travers and 2 other missing individuals from neighboring counties. Computers were seized. Files printed out and handwritten notes were bagged for evidence. It was clear Harrow hadn't just been holding these people. He'd been experimenting on them. His focus? Trauma. Fear. Neurological responses under extreme stress. Unauthorized research conducted on unwilling subjects, prisoners, in every sense of the word. Dr. Vincent Harrow's background in medicine gave him access to things most people couldn't get their hands on. That included certain pharmaceutical compounds, ones he had been using to sedate and control his victims. When police executed the warrant at his home, Harrow wasn't there. He'd left for work that morning like nothing was wrong. They picked him up later that afternoon at a private research facility where he still maintained an office. When detectives confronted him with what they had found, Harrow didn't flinch. No panic. No denial. Just a cold, clinical calm that shook even the seasoned investigators in the room. "You do not understand the value of this work," he told Detective Sandoval during his first interview. "Traditional research protocols are too restrictive. Some truths can only be revealed under the right psychological conditions, real fear, real desperation." As the investigation widened, 5 victims were eventually located. 5 people who had been held in Harrow basement lab for days or even weeks before being dumped in remote areas. Each one had been heavily drugged, and most had only hazy, fragmented memories of what had happened to them. The physical evidence found at the house suggested there had been at least 3 more victims, whose fates remain unknown. Nina Travers, the young graduate student who was found in the basement, had been sedated and restrained for 4 days. She became one of the key witnesses at trial, though her road to recovery would be long and painful. What she remembered was enough to prove what Harrow had done. And then there was Ray, the mysterious voice on the radio, the man who had pulled the first thread and refused to let it unravel unnoticed. His real name was Raymond Griggs. He lived across the street from Harrow, a retired security specialist who'd spent decades analyzing surveillance footage for a living. When the police failed to take his initial reports seriously, brushing them off as a neighbor feud, he turned to the only outlet he had left, a radio show. "I knew how it sounded," Griggs said later in court. "Just a nosy old guy with binoculars. A conspiracy nut. But I couldn't ignore what I was seeing. And when the cops showed up that night and walked away 15 minutes later, that's when I knew I had to build something they couldn't ignore. I had to make a record. That record, his videos, his notes, his persistence, was what finally cracked the case." Dr. Harrow was convicted on multiple charges: kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, assault, and conducting unauthorized medical procedures on unwilling human subjects. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the Glenmore Police Department, the case triggered serious changes. Officers began receiving updated training on how to handle reports of suspicious behavior, especially when the subject was someone seen as upstanding or influential in the community. Officer Walker, whose gut instinct and quiet determination led him to dig deeper when others might have walked away, was promoted to detective. He now teaches a training session for new recruits. "The thing that still gets me," Walker tells them, "is how normal everything looked. It was a nice house in a good neighborhood. The guy drove a clean car, waved to his neighbors. You'd pass him on patrol and not think twice. But behind those walls, behind all that normalcy, was a whole other world. A world he designed to keep hidden." Callista Dean, the radio host whose show first gave Griggs a voice, stepped away from broadcasting after the trial. She said she couldn't continue running a program built around anonymous confessions after learning just how real and dangerous some secrets could be. On her final show, she left her audience with a simple dedication: "To the people who speak up when something doesn't sit right, even when nobody's listening." The house at 412 Cypress Hollow sat empty for years. No one wanted to live there, no matter how low the asking price dropped. Eventually, the city bought the property, tore down the structure, and in 2021, built a small community garden in its place. A modest plaque rests at the edge of the flower beds, quietly honoring the survivors of what the townspeople still call the Cypress Hollow House. In Glenmore, the case is more than just history, it's a warning. A reminder that sometimes, the real predators aren't hiding in the shadows. They're walking around in daylight, wearing smiles, holding titles, living behind picket fences in neighborhoods just like yours. It also taught them the importance of listening, really listening, to the people who notice the strange things, the patterns, the inconsistencies, the details others dismiss. As Raymond Griggs said in his testimony, sometimes, the only way to catch what's happening is to look for the stuff that doesn't add up. You watch long enough, and you'll see it. The people who go in, but never come out. February 2014. That winter was brutal, even by Brook Hollow's standards. Temperatures dipped so low it felt like the cold was crawling into your bones. That night, February 17th, it had dropped to 15 below zero. Officers Scott Renner and Thomas Morgan were in their patrol car, heater struggling against the cold, slowly cruising through Crestwood Park. The area was massive, wooded, quiet, mostly empty during winter. It had become something of a ghost zone this time of year. Perfect for someone who didn't want to be found. It was 11:43 p.m., and we were just about to finish our third and final sweep of the area when something caught my eye out the passenger side window. "Hang on a second," I said, pointing toward an open patch about 50 yards off the road. "There's a light over there." Renner eased the patrol car to a slower crawl, narrowing his eyes to get a better look through the thick darkness. Sure enough, a soft glow was seeping through the trees, odd for this part of the park, especially at this time of night and in this kind of weather. "Probably some kids messing around," Renner offered, though he didn't sound too sure. Teenagers sometimes snuck out to these remote parts of the park to party or get high, but not usually in the middle of winter like this. "Let's check it out," I said, already grabbing my heavy-duty flashlight from under the dash. We radioed our location to dispatch, letting them know we were going to investigate what looked like an unauthorized presence in the area. Once we pulled off onto a service road and parked, we stepped out into the snow. Each step made a crisp crunch as our boots broke through the icy crust. As we closed in on the light, we could make out the source, a battery lantern resting on the ground next to what looked like a freshly cleared circle in the snow. The area was about 8 feet wide, and the snow had been scraped clean down to the hard, frozen dirt. "What the hell?" Renner muttered, taking in the strange scene. Beside the exposed patch sat a duffel bag and a couple of gardening tools, a spade and a pickaxe, by the look of them. I approached the bag with caution, unzipping it slowly while keeping my flashlight trained on the contents. Inside, we found a few plastic bags, a roll of duct tape, a box of disposable gloves, and a bottle of bleach. We locked eyes, both of us immediately knowing what that meant. These were all telltale signs of someone trying to clean up, or hide, something bad. "Somebody's out here digging in frozen ground in the middle of the night," Renner said low. "And they brought cleanup gear." I nodded, a tight feeling forming in my chest. "They're either burying something," I said, "or digging it up," Renner finished. We did a quick sweep of the area and spotted a trail of fresh footprints heading deeper into the woods. Whoever had been out here clearly took off when they saw, or maybe heard, us roll up. Renner got on the radio again, calling for backup and a crime scene team. "Possible gravesite located in the southeast corner of Crestwood Park," he said. "No suspect in sight, but signs of recent activity." While we waited for backup to arrive, we secured the area and kept poking around, careful not to disturb anything that might be evidence. My flashlight caught something tucked just under a shrub nearby, a plastic tarp, neatly folded, but stained with something dark. "Scott," I called out softly, "you need to come look at this." Before Renner could reply, we both froze. Somewhere beyond the beam of our flashlights, a branch cracked. We drew our weapons instantly, standing back to back. "Police! Identify yourself!" Renner called out, his voice bouncing off the trees. No answer, but we both felt it. Someone was moving just outside our line of sight, maybe 30 yards out. I swung my flashlight in that direction, and for a brief second, it lit up a figure before it ducked behind a big oak tree. "Police! Stop right there!" I shouted. But whoever it was had already turned and was moving deeper into the woods. We were at a crossroads. Protocol said we should wait for backup before making a move in a situation like this. Unknown threat, bad visibility, tricky terrain. Still, we couldn't ignore the fact that this person might be behind everything we'd just found. "I'm going after them," I told Renner. Stay here and secure the scene until backup gets here. Mike, wait. He started, but I was already off, following the tracks in the snow. Renner radioed dispatch again to report the new development and ask for more units immediately. I could hear him calling behind me as I crashed through the brush, shouting for the suspect to stop. Then, nothing. The woods went silent. Mike? I heard Renner's voice calling after me. I didn't answer, I couldn't. Worried, Renner made the call to follow me in. He moved with care, weapon drawn, shouting my name every few seconds as he followed the trail I'd left. About 60 yards in, the tracks led to a shallow ravine. My print stopped at the edge. Renner's flashlight found me lying at the bottom, maybe 15 feet down, not moving. Officer down. He called in right away. Southeast section of Crestwood Park, officer down in ravine. He picked his way down the slope carefully and reached me. I was out cold but still breathing. Looked like I'd taken a nasty spill during the chase and smacked my head on one of the rocks poking through the snow. As Renner knelt beside me to give first aid, he couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone out there. The ravine was a natural trap, no doubt about it. Its steep, snow-covered sides made getting out tricky, maybe even impossible without help. Even worse, Renner couldn't get a clear view of the woods around him anymore. Those high walls blocked out the forest, cutting off his line of sight and leaving him vulnerable. That's when he heard it. A faint crunch in the snow. It came from behind him and slightly above. Renner spun on instinct, lifting both his flashlight and his gun in one smooth motion. The light caught a man standing at the top of the ravine. He was dressed head to toe in black, gloves, knit cap, everything. But it was the pickaxe in his hand that sent a jolt of adrenaline through Renner's chest. Same kind of tool they'd seen by the dug-up snow earlier. Drop the weapon. Get on the ground, now! Renner barked, his sidearm locked on the guy. The man didn't move at first. He just stood there, quiet, like he was working out what to do next. Then, just like that, he turned and bolted, disappearing beyond the ridge. Renner froze. He was stuck between two terrible choices: go after the suspect or stay with his unconscious partner lying helpless below. It wasn't just a tactical decision, it was personal. In the end, it wasn't even a choice. There was no way he could leave Morgan alone down there, injured, freezing, and now possibly a target. So Renner held his ground. For the next 11 minutes, he stayed crouched beside his partner, eyes constantly scanning the top of the ravine, finger resting against the trigger. Every sound, every shift in the wind, had him on edge. When backup finally showed up, they found Renner shaking like a leaf, his own uniform jacket draped over Morgan to keep him warm. Morgan was taken straight to Brook Hollow General. The doc said he had a nasty concussion and was slipping into hypothermia. He'd eventually pull through, but that night would leave scars that didn't show up on any medical chart. Crime scene techs spent the next couple days picking apart the area we'd found. Turns out, our gut was right. It was a grave. Ground-penetrating radar picked up something 4 feet down, and when they dug it out with care, they uncovered human remains, wrapped in plastic, tied up with duct tape. The same kind of stuff that was in the duffel bag. The victim was a 26-year-old grad student named Amanda Atkins. She'd gone missing 3 months earlier. The autopsy confirmed she'd been strangled, likely just before being buried out there in the cold. 2 weeks after that grim discovery, they got a DNA hit from what was left on the tools and bag. Craig Griggs, 41. His name rang a bell. He'd had a few run-ins over stalking complaints, but had never been convicted of anything serious. When the cops showed up at his place to arrest him, he took his own life rather than face the charges. Digging deeper into Griggs's home turned up evidence tying him to 2 other disappearances from nearby counties. His journals told the rest of the story, how he'd fixated on Amanda after seeing her jogging through Crestwood Park one day. What really chilled everyone was learning why he'd come back that night. His notes showed he was worried winter runoff might uncover the grave. He wasn't just reminiscing, he was planning to move the body, to hide the evidence all over again. He never expected anyone to be out there, not on a freezing February night. That case changed things for the Brook Hollow PD. They rewrote the rulebook for nighttime patrols in isolated areas. The new Crestwood procedure made it clear no fewer than 3 officers respond to any call like that from now on. Renner got a commendation for what he did that night, though he always brushed it off, said he just did what any good partner would. Still, folks in the department never forgot. That moment sealed his reputation, and not long after, he got promoted to detective. Morgan eventually got back on duty after 6 weeks of rest and rehab. But when he returned, he asked to be moved to the day shift. Said he'd had enough of the graveyard run. The truth was, the whole thing rattled him bad. Not the fall. Not the injury. It was knowing he'd been lying there helpless, exposed. If Griggs had come back while Renner was gone. "I still dream about it," Morgan admitted during a follow-up session with the department shrink. "Not the part where I fall. I dream about being alone down there. Not able to move. And Griggs coming back to finish the job." That night remains one of the most sobering chapters in Brook Hollow's history. What started as a routine sweep ended up revealing a hidden horror. The part of the park where Amanda was found has since been turned into a memorial garden. It's a quiet place now, with flowers and benches, where people can reflect, most of them never knowing what once lay buried beneath their feet. As for Renner and Morgan, they no longer work the same hours, but the bond they formed that night never faded. You'll still catch them at department gatherings now and then, talking quietly off to the side. No need for words. They call it the last patrol, the final time they rode out together. A night that reshaped both of their lives forever. New recruits still hear about it during training. And when Sergeant Renner tells the story, he always ends the same way. The most dangerous calls don't always start loud. Sometimes it's just a light where it shouldn't be, or a noise that doesn't belong. Listen to your gut. Follow the rules. And remember, your partner's life might hang on what you choose to do in the space of a heartbeat.